Hey, folks. Sorry, took me a couple minutes to figure out how to get myself actually showing on the screen here. Thanks to all of you for showing up. Again, this is only our second time streaming, so I apologize for the technology glitches. For those of you new here, I am, of course, attorney Andrew Branker for Law and Self-Defense, and we are here to talk about a pepper spray event that just occurred in the St. Petersburg area of Florida. Hopefully, I'll be able to share the video of that with you. I think we have all that set up now. Let's see. Hopefully, that'll be the case. We'll see. So this actually was brought to my attention. Let's try sharing right now, actually. Brought to my attention by my one genuinely famous friend, the actor Adam Baldwin. We've known each other for quite a long time. And he forwarded me this tweet from Twitter describing this event, including a video of this event. The description here in the tweet is: a Mormon youth out for an alcohol-free night on the town in St. Petersburg, Florida, encounters an old man in a floppy straw hat being brutally beaten by black bouncers on a sidewalk outside a bar. He deftly sprays their leader with mace and is subsequently savaged by onlookers. So a couple things. One is, I think as we watch the video, I see in the comments, this is Adam Baldwin, folks, not Alec Baldwin. So I think as we watch the video, we'll see, first of all, that's not a very accurate description of what happened here. Second of all, I also want to mention is I happen to have a number of friends who are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they informed me this morning that many people of that faith consider themselves or consider the term Mormon to be somewhat offensive. So that was certainly not my intent. First time I ever heard that. But now that I'm aware, we'll do our best to avoid using a term that people might find offensive. And the person's religion, first of all, I don't even know if it's true. And second of all, it's completely irrelevant to any of the dynamics of this particular case. In terms of answering questions over the course of the show, we're broadcasting this both, I believe we're broadcasting it simultaneously to our Law of Self-Defense members on the membership page. Let me take a look and see if that is working correctly. Still a test, and it is not working correctly. Sorry about that, folks. So if you're a Law of Self-Defense member, we're broadcasting live on YouTube at the moment, but not on your membership dashboard. So sorry about that. We'll try again next time. But in terms of answering questions, we're going to have to, because of time constraints, I had not actually planned on broadcasting at all today, folks. So didn't really set aside time for this, but we will answer questions that are submitted via Super Chat on YouTube. And we would have answered questions submitted by our members on the member dashboard, but unfortunately that part's not working. So let us proceed now. If I can, I think I need to unshare that. Okay. And move over here. I'll go to playing the video so we can run through it once or twice, so we're all on the same page in terms of what happened in this event. Let me see if I can pull that up. Now you'll notice when I play this, there's a large white box on the left, because that's where commenting is on the source of this video. And there was quite a bit of racial profanity, lots of use of the N-word. There's been suggestions that some of these, there may be some racial aspect to this event. I don't see that in this video, so I'm not going to address any of that. We're going to have our commentary, our analysis, our discussion based simply on what's shown here in the video. So I apologize for the big white box, but I prefer not to air racial profanity over any of my channels. And again, it's completely irrelevant anyway to the legal and relevant analysis of this event. And the white box doesn't really cover anything up anyway. So with that said, let me see if I can go ahead and play this, and hopefully it'll play with the audio as well. The audio is not super important, but it's a little bit helpful. So let's see if that will work. Okay. So we start off here with a gentleman in a white floppy hat. Happens to be, looks like an older white guy. This looks to be a street side bar. The The black gentleman looking down at him is apparently a bouncer at this bar. Now, the person who intervenes here, the person with the pepper spray, may not know that this black guy is a bouncer. Who knows? It looks like he's wearing a bar shirt. I mean, he looks like a bouncer to me. Certainly, the white guy on the ground is presumably there because the bouncer put him there, which usually means he was being a dick at the bar. That's generally how that happens. But again, the person who intervened may not know much of this. So from their perspective, we're not sure exactly what they knew. I will suggest that not knowing is a red flag that should deter most people from deciding to intervene in these kinds of events. But I'll circle back to that in a bit. So I'll start the video now. What we'll see is there's some talking going on back and forth here. And the gentleman on the ground ends up getting punched in the face by the black gentleman. And then the black gentleman takes a step back after the punch to the face, and the gentleman in the hat kind of swats at him with his hand. And then it looks like the black gentleman's going to deliver a responsive punch to that swat. And that's when the OC spray comes into play by the person who intervenes in the situation. So let's go ahead and play that video and see what happens. Okay, I'm going to try that again because I believe I had a setting incorrect. Let's see on my computer. So let me go ahead and try to fix that. And hopefully we're still live. And hopefully this will work. Let's go ahead and give that another shot. So, pop in the face. Looks like a little bit of a kick. Pepper spray. So the bouncer's been pepper sprayed at that point. All right, now there's a bunch of profanity I'm just hearing for the first time in the background, so I'm not going to continue playing it. We don't need to know all that much more that's going on to do our analysis here. There's a lot of other either patrons or workers at the bar informing Pepper Spray Man that, hey, that guy you pepper sprayed is a bouncer. He works here. If you didn't know what was going on, why would you intervene? You need to stay out of this. And the commentary on Twitter said this guy with the pepper spray was savage. I don't see that. I mean, it looks like at one point like he gets a shove and then he prudently departs the scene. But that's pretty much all we need to know. So there's a couple of ways of looking at this situation. And one is kind of the legal black letter law of the use of force involved here. The other is specifically in the context of defense of others, because this does appear to be a defense of others scenario, and that complicates things considerably. And the third is really outside my own area of expertise, but a subject I know just enough about to, I think, share the insight of someone who is an expert. And that is on the subject of something that can be referred to as the educational beatdown. So something important to keep in mind. So first, the black letter of the law. Let me stop the screen share here, and I'm back. So what kind of force is involved here? Again, we have the 5 elements of self-defense, of course: innocence, imminence, proportionality, avoidance, and reasonableness. And those are the up to 5 elements that could apply in this situation. Now, of course, we're coming in the midst of the situation, right? The gentleman in the straw hat is already on the ground. We don't really know how he got there. I'll presume for purposes of discussion that the bouncer put him on the ground in the first place. How exactly that happened, we don't know. That could be a justified use of force. So if we imagine, we speculate, rather informed speculation for any of those who've spent any time in an adult beverage facility, the people who tend to get put on the ground by bouncers are people who are misbehaving. Bouncers don't just knock people to the ground. The bar is running a business. It wants people to have a good time. But every once in a while, somebody shows up who's sufficiently a dick that they need to be removed from the premises. And removal from the premises can result in them ending up on the ground. It's not at all uncommon. And removing someone that you don't want on your business property, and in this case, the bouncer would be acting as the agent of the owner of the business property. That's simply once you've told them to leave and they don't leave, they're committing a trespass, and you can use non-deadly force to remove a simple trespasser from your property. In the course of using that non-deadly force, it's not unusual for people to end up on the ground, and then you continue to encourage them to leave. So the bouncer initiating the use of force, normally we're not privileged to initiate the use of force unless we're facing a threat of force, but removing a trespasser is a permissible initiation of a use of force. And again, folks, I can only answer comments if they're super chats. So for those of you wondering why I'm not answering, that's why. Removing a simple trespasser is it's permissible to use non-deadly force in order to do that. Here it appears to me that the bar is removing this elderly man from their premises. They're obviously privileged to serve beverages there. There's tables set up. It's not simply a public sidewalk. It's something that they're using as part of their business, presumably with permission to do so. And so the gentleman ends up on the ground. And then we have this exchange. And the gentleman is on the ground, is not in a great defensible position. The bouncer punches him in the face. Normally, a punch to the face is going to be deemed to be non-deadly force because although it can cause serious bodily injury and punches can and do kill people on occasion, that outcome is so rare that unless there's some aggravating factor, the courts are going to treat a thrown punch, especially a single thrown punch, as non-deadly force. Now, that's different than if it was a sustained beatdown, stomping. Obviously, there's ways that a barehanded attack can escalate to something readily able to inflict death or serious bodily harm. But the occasional thrown punch is unlikely to be that, especially if the person being punched sees it coming. Most of these knockout game scenarios that we see where people suffer serious injury, they really never saw the punch coming. They were completely blindsided. And then it's quite a bit easier to actually attain a knockout of the victim. So now within the scope of non-deadly force, so we have, of course, these two buckets of force in the use of force analysis: deadly force and non-deadly force. This was not, by all appearances, a deadly force event, but if it had been, once you're in the deadly force bucket, then all force is comparable to all other force. There are not degrees of deadly force. All deadly force is deadly force, force readily capable of inflicting death or serious bodily injury within that deadly force bucket. You do, of course, have to maintain proportionality. That's one of the 5 elements of self-defense, meaning you can only go to deadly force if you're facing a deadly force threat or certain other legal criteria are met. If you're only facing a non-deadly force threat, you can only use non-deadly force in self-defense. So that's one meaning of proportionality: non-deadly force to non-deadly force, deadly force to deadly force. But within the deadly force bucket, there's another facet of proportionality we need to keep in mind. While there's no different degrees of deadly force, there are different degrees of non-deadly force. There's a continuum of non-deadly force. A finger poke to the chest is not the same thing as a punch to the face. So could we make an argument here that whatever the white gentleman on the sidewalk was doing, he was not lawfully subject to being punched in the face as he was here? Yeah, I suppose you could make that argument. The bartender had other options, legally speaking. An argument could be made that that punch to the face in those circumstances with the bouncer above the gentleman on the ground was excessive within that non-deadly force bucket. But folks, we also need to keep in mind that we're dealing here not just with the black letter of the law. Unfortunately, I often think that people think that, well, if their use of force would have been lawful or unlawful, either way, whatever the legal analysis might indicate, that's also somehow a determinator of the physical outcome of the fight. So if the use of defensive force would have been lawful, then they would have won the physical fight, because that's very dangerous thinking. The outcome of the physical fight and whether or not the force involved was lawful or not are two completely different things. And our first mission, although my personal expertise is in use of force law, not use of force, not actual fighting, the priority has to be to survive the fight, folks. The legal issues don't matter all that much if you're killed or maimed in the course of the fight. You have to win first. And the moment you get involved in a physical altercation, your chances of being killed or maimed in that fight suddenly went from 0, where they were before you were engaged in the fight, to something more than zero. Maybe you're a great fighter. Maybe you're great with a gun or a knife or whatever. You could be the world's best. But the risk of dying in the fight or being maimed in the fight is never zero. It's always more than zero. It just might not be your day. And if you're a drunk dude at a bar getting kicked out by bouncers who are presumably not drunk, your chances of suffering serious injury, well, your ability to defend yourself against the prospect of serious injury is likely as impaired as the rest of you. So it's not a very good choice for getting into a physical confrontation. And that's completely independent of any legal issues, folks. So please keep in mind the legal stuff matters only if you survive the physical confrontation. You have to do that first, which often means simply not conducting yourself in a way that you end up in a physical confrontation. All of this also applies to the gentleman who engaged with the pepper spray in this instance. So let's talk a bit about defense of others, because that's what this appears to be, a defense of others situation. And the law does allow you to come to the defense of others. Basically, you can use force in the defense of another person to the same extent they would have been privileged to use force in their own defense, or alternatively, to the same extent you would have been privileged to use force if you were in their circumstances. So basically, you step into their shoes is one way to think of it. But there are dangers, legal dangers and practical dangers involved in coming to the defense of others that don't exist when we're talking about self-defense. So when you look at the black letter of the law, often the state's self-defense statute, the same language applies to defense of self and defense of others. They just include the third person pronoun in their self-defense statute. So the self-defense statute will say, you are privileged to use force in defense of yourself or another person if the 5 elements of self-defense are present, for example. So on the black letter of the law, it looks like the situation should be exactly the same, exactly parallel. But for practical reasons, it's not. And one thing to keep in mind, too, is there's not a single type of defense of others scenario from a practical perspective. There's at least 3, right? There's the defense of others where you know the other. You know them. They're a member of your family. They're your wife. They're your child. They're your brother. They're your parent. Maybe they're a neighbor, they're a coworker, but there's somebody you know something about their character. Whether or not it's likely, for example, that they themselves were the initial aggressor in the confrontation. You know something, even if you didn't see what happened, you know something about what happened because you know that person. That's one defense of others scenario. Another defense of others scenario is where you're actually intervening on behalf of a total stranger. You know nothing about them. And there we have some exceptional risks that come up because for all you know, they may have started the fight. They may themselves not have a privilege to use force in self-defense, which can functionally undermine your privilege to use force on their behalf. They're not actually an innocent actor. Also, because they're a stranger, they have no interest in you. They may have an interest in actually the person who's beating them. This comes up a lot in domestic violence scenarios where 2 partners may be physically brawling in the street and someone intervenes to protect the female partner. And then the cops show up and the female partner realizes, well, her abuser is about to spend Christmas in jail again for the 3rd year in a row and the kids won't be able to take it and blah, 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 blah. And suddenly she begins to remember events differently than you observe them, differently than they really happened. And she starts to suggest that, hey, listen, we were arguing, but we argue all the time. It's part of the nature of our relationship. The only time I was really worried was when this nut job, pointing at you, decided to violently intervene. Well, the person you purportedly rescued is telling the cops that you were the problem. The only reason the situation became violent was because of you. You initiated force in that encounter. What are the cops supposed to think? What is anybody supposed to think who was not there, didn't see what actually happened? The police, the prosecutor, a judge, a jury. You're putting the rest of your life, effectively, on best case scenario, I mean, you're going to be questioned by the police. If they decide to charge you, now you have to retain an attorney. You could be talking tens of thousands of dollars. You may go to trial. And if you go to trial, there's always a greater than zero risk of actually getting convicted. So you're incurring a tremendous amount of risk on behalf of a stranger whose interest may be contrary to your own interest, who may tell a very different story than your perceptions of events. Now, I will say, I'm not telling anyone, any of you, not to intervene on behalf of a third person. That's a decision you have to make for yourself based on those particular circumstances. I know there's a part of the community that feels, I guess they often describe themselves as sheepdogs. They have the means and ability to intervene to protect innocent people being victimized by violence, unlawful violence, and I get that. It sounds to me like a very moral position. But I just want you to make that call in an informed way, understanding the legal and practical risks that you're facing when you make that decision to intervene on behalf of a stranger. So, not telling you not to intervene, just want you to be aware of the risks that you incur when you decide to make that decision. And then there's a third form of defense of other scenario that's really quite different than the others, and that is the active shooter scenario. So someone's in a mall, usually with a long gun, shooting people dead, or they're, heaven forbid, in a school. And that's different. Now, of course, the people they're shooting are also strangers to you, but it's fundamentally different than a more traditional defensive stranger scenario, because the real risk in the defensive stranger scenario is the ambiguity around the event. Remember, the people judging your conduct afterwards don't know what happened. They weren't there when this went down. They may be hearing different stories from different people, maybe stories contrary to your claim of a justified use of force in defense of others. In an actual active shooter situation, there's no ambiguity about what's going on. Somebody's walking around gunning people down in a church, in a school, in a mall, whatever the case may be. So intervening in an active shooter situation, to my mind, the legal risks are essentially zero. That doesn't mean there aren't risks. Obviously, you're getting into a gunfight if you decide to intervene. You probably only have a handgun, and that other guy has a long gun, and that's not a very favorable lineup or matchup for you intervening. On the other hand, there's a lot of innocent people being gunned down, and maybe the only way to stop that from happening is for you to intervene. So I would certainly understand the incentive to intervene. I've never been in the military. I've never been a cop. I don't consider myself particularly brave. I'd like to think if there was I've got 4 kids. If there was a school shooting and I had the means to intervene and stop that I would do so. I'd like to think that about myself. But when I made that decision, I would make it with the understanding that there's a good chance I'm not surviving that encounter, either because I'll be shot by the bad guy or because I'll be shot by the police who respond, because they're looking for a dude with a gun. And that's what I'm going to look like when they show up. And by the way, this happens with some frequency, folks. Active shooter events, often plainclothes police officers flood in with everybody else, and you'll have one plainclothes officer shoot another plainclothes officer. And obviously, neither one of them was acting with malice, but the shooting officer reasonably perceived the other as prospectively the active shooter, took the shot, killed him. It's a mistake, not criminal, but it's a tragedy nonetheless. And of course, that occur to any of us if we intervene in that kind of event. Again, not telling you to not intervene in an active shooter event. Just want you to make that decision in an informed way. So here we're dealing with what looks like a traditional defense of other scenario. The person with the pepper spray sees the gentleman on the ground, sees him get punched in the face on the ground, decide that he's going to intervene. Does he know the person throwing the punch is a bouncer? Does he understand what's going on? Does he know what behavior occurred prior? Almost certainly not. There's no indication of that in the video. In fact, my recollection from the video is that he explicitly says that he didn't have a full understanding of what was going on. And another gentleman asks him, well, then why are you intervening? And that's a good question, folks, because this was not a vicious beatdown that was sustained, that was likely to actually inflict death or serious bodily injury. This was not a disparity of numbers attack. This, in fact, looked to me like something that's often described, well, I shouldn't say often, but accurately described as an educational beatdown. Now, if you've never heard that phrase, that is not a phrase of my creation. That is a phrase by someone who genuinely is an expert in the actual use of force and the social dynamics around the use of force. And you should, if you're not familiar with this guy, you should definitely look him up. His name is Rory Miller. In fact, I'll hold up one of his books I have right here. That's his name, so you can get it, Rory Miller. The title of this particular book is Facing Violence. This is the one I'll be quoting from about educational beatdowns. Rory's got a number of books out. They're all excellent. So if you're interested in kind of the social dynamics of use of force, what leads people to engage in violence against each other in different cultural settings, because it's not the same in every cultural setting, then I would encourage you to take advantage. At least this book. This book is truly exceptional, but really everything that Rory does is very good. And I don't have any kind of special link for him or any kind of arrangement. We're familiar with each other, of course, and I think the world of his work. So I'm just encouraging you to take a look, see if you like it yourself. You can get the book off Amazon. I'm quite confident. So Rory talks about an educational beatdown. Let me see if I can. He talks about it in this book, Facing Violence. He also talks about it on a blog post he put up way back, almost exactly 8 years ago, December 6th, 2013. I'm going to see if I can share this page here, and so you can see it with me as I'm stepping through it. And by the way, as I talk about this educational beatdown stuff, content, this is not law. This is separate from law, but it's real and it can kill you. And understanding this dynamic can keep you from being the unintended victim of an educational beatdown. Remember, that educational beatdown might be completely unlawful and you might be completely justified in using force to defend yourself against it, but it's still a beatdown. Right? And we don't want to put ourselves at risk of that, certainly unintentionally. And if you do decide to put yourself at risk of that intentionally, you want it to be an informed decision. So let's see if I can pull that up. I don't know how legible this will be. It's not great. Let me see if I can make it. Oh, I can. How about that? A little bigger. Okay, so I'm going to step through this. And again, this is the work of Rory Miller. This is not my own work, but I find it compelling, and hopefully you'll find it compelling as well. So Rory Miller writes, and this is, I'm not sure this is exactly the same wording as his book, but it's darn close, because I did a quick review of both. So he writes, most of the people reading this will be comfortable products of comfortable homes with significant education and socialization. This is the norm in North America. The norm is so powerful and pervasive that it can be very easy to believe that the values of middle-class Americans are universal. They are not. There are societies and sub-societies where violence is merely an easy way to solve problems, where a beating, it's considered as easy and more effective than talking. There are places in the United States where if you do something rude and improper, you will get disapproving looks and people will whisper about you. They might snub you in the coffee room or not invite you to go bowling. And there are places in the US where doing something that society considers rude will get you beaten without a second thought. And if that's news to you, Rory writes, take a second and let it seep in. And I'll pause there for my own commentary. Folks, that's the real world. It may not be your neighborhood, but it's some neighborhoods. And it's likely to be a neighborhood where it's a premises that serves alcohol and feels the need to have bouncers there. Those bouncers are probably not your neighbors. They're probably people from this other sector of society who are comfortable going hands-on and using violence. Most of us are not, in particular, comfortable doing those things. But some people are, because it works within their cultural framework. In fact, it may be vital within their cultural framework. So Rory tells a story here. Rory worked as a prison guard for many years. He tells a story here about an inmate who was suddenly attacked in the middle of the television room at the jail, punched twice, bloody nose, black eye, and the inmate himself wouldn't say who had done it. And in fact, all he would say is, "Here we go, Sarge, I had it coming. I forgot where I was watching TV, and I said, hey, look, you could kill 3 N-words with 1 bullet. Next thing I knew, I was lying on my back. I deserved it." And he said, the prisoner, it was sort of an educational beatdown. And he was able to return to the prison room with no problem. And the idea behind an educational beatdown is that someone missteps, does something perceived as offensive or insulting, and it's perceived that they need to be educated, physically educated about their mistake. And the thing about an educational beatdown is it's really intended as a lesson. So if you take the beatdown, and usually it's not really a beatdown. Usually it's a single punch or a slap or a shove. But if you accept the punishment, acknowledge that you were a dick, that's generally the end of it. It's like the spanking of a puppy is one way that Rory puts it. Where things can get escalated is where the recipient of the educational beatdown, and by the way, in the context of this educational beatdown, normally the observers around from the same cultural group as the person delivering that educational beatdown, they think it was completely deserved. They're just as offended as the person delivering the beatdown. So they're not going to intervene. They think you acted like a dick and this is what you have coming, and accept the punishment. It'll all be good. Where things can escalate out of control is where the person who's acted like a dick doesn't accept the punishment or decides he wants to fight back. And then it becomes a genuine, sustained fight where serious injury can likely occur. I expect, if we could have seen what happened immediately preceding these events, that this gentleman in the floppy hat was told to leave and didn't leave, or told to leave and decided to argue about it, or hands were put on him to escort him out and he resisted being escorted out. Those are all things where it's likely to escalate from simply a request to a physically enforced request to a shove, a knock to the ground, a punch to the face, if non-compliance with what's perceived as lawful instructions by the person issuing them. I don't mean lawful in an actual legal way, but they think what they're doing is appropriate. This is not the law, folks. This is just how human beings interact with each other. So if you don't want to be subject to these increasing levels of force, even if they're unlawful, folks, we don't want to be subject to them, right? You don't want to. You're going to defend your self-believing right that you have a privilege to be in that bar by fighting the bouncer. I mean, that's not a formula for success anywhere. So that's Rory's concept on the educational beatdown. So as he writes here, all societies, sub-societies, groups have rules. Sometimes the rules are formal, like statutes, like we normally deal with. Sometimes the rules are informal. Families don't have constitutions, but the kids know what behaviors will get them in trouble. And by the way, in a bar that has bouncers, the people who own that bar and the bouncers and most of the patrons understand there's a set of rules there. If the bouncers ask you to leave because they think you've done something wrong or insulting or offensive, they're going to make you leave. They're not going to change their minds because you're arguing about it with them. And if necessary, they'll use force to compel you to leave. And that'll happen even if what they're doing is not actually lawful, folks. Even if you're being subject to unlawful force, it's still going to happen. So what do you want to do? Do you want to fight with them over it? That's how you end up in the situation of this guy who was on the ground here. So I think that's all I need to quote from Rory there. Let me shut that down. So, folks, part of it is, again, this scenario we need to understand is the black letter law, the dangers of relying on the black letter law in defense of other situations, and the real world social dynamics of violence between people, and what leads people to be willing to use physical force upon another. And those things are loosely related. It's a very loose Venn diagram. They're not entirely related, but if you're killed in a physical confrontation unlawfully, or you successfully defend yourself in a physical confrontation you could otherwise have avoided, and now find yourself criminally charged, going to trial, maybe in a political environment that's very unfavorable to you, where getting an impartial jury will be all but impossible, where conviction becomes all but certain, regardless of the legal merits. We've seen those cases, correct? It's imprudent to put yourself at risk of that situation. And I say that as someone who's prepared to defend myself, defend my family if necessary, if I don't have any other choice. I carry a gun for personal protection. I have my entire adult life. I'm prepared to use that gun if I have to. But if I don't have to, I'm not going to do that. If I have any other option consistent with safety, I will take advantage of that other option rather than resorting to force. Because the moment, again, that you get engaged in that physical confrontation, your risk of dying in that confrontation, because keep in mind, folks, you don't get to pick the intensity of force that ends up being used. You're not fighting with yourself. There's other people there. They get to pick the intensity of force that the fight gets escalated to. It's not up to you how violent things get. So even though you think you may be intervening with pepper spray, hey, it's only non-deadly force, that's all I'm doing, that doesn't mean you won't be subject to a deadly force counterattack. Even if it's just a disparity of numbers attack, a real beatdown that can inflict death or serious bodily injury, that's not up to you. That's someone else's decision to make. So the minute you get engaged in that physical confrontation, even if you think it's merely a non-deadly force confrontation, your risk of getting killed or maimed suddenly went from 0 to something more than 0. And your risk of facing legal jeopardy, maybe getting charged, prosecuted, convicted, sentenced, 10 years, 20 years in prison, suddenly also went from 0 to something more than 0. Now, there are circumstances in which incurring a greater than 0 risk of death and a greater than 0 risk of conviction are worth it. There are circumstances that are worth those risks. Dying, being maimed, being raped, having any of those things happen to your spouse or your children or somebody you care about or have a legal duty to protect. But once you get beyond that list of things, that very limited list of things that make the prospect of death and conviction worth it, there aren't a lot of things that after that are worth a substantive risk of death or criminal conviction and felony time in prison. There's not a lot. So it's not for me to tell you where that line is. That's for each of you to decide. At what point are you willing to incur those greater than 0 risks of death or criminal prosecution, conviction, sentencing, maybe spending much of the rest of your life in prison? You have to decide where to draw that line for yourself. All I can do is help you, one, get those risks as close to 0 as possible. Obviously, I do that in the legal context. As we say, if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, know the law so you're hard to convict. But the other thing we can try to help you do, of course, is also make that decision in an informed way. So at least you understand and know the risks you are incurring when you make those decisions. And then that's all any of us can do for ourselves, I hope. So I do want to mention one last thing before we wrap up. How long have I been on? About 40 minutes. Many of you, and I'll share a screen here again. I guess I have to share the whole thing. I'll do it like this. Most of you hopefully are familiar, are aware that we're holding a Law of Self-Defense live online class, what we call our Law of Self-Defense Advanced class, coming up on Saturday, January 8th, 2022. A full day course of instruction on self-defense law taught in plain English, the equivalent of a law school seminar on use of force law if law schools taught this stuff at that level, which unfortunately none of them do to my knowledge. This is only in about a week now, right? Today's Friday. So a week and a day. We only do this class every year or every 2 years. So if you missed this one, it's going to be quite some time before it comes around again. And we have been getting a lot of questions about if I want to obtain access to the class, but I can't do it on January 8th. Will it be possible to view a recording of the class after the fact? And the answer to that question is yes. We will make a recording of the class available. We'll record the live class, make that available to everyone who's registered. So whether you were able to attend the live class or not, a lot of people see advantage to attending the live class and then watching the recording as well to refresh their recollection or go over a second time some content that may have not been entirely absorbed the first time around. So we'll have that recording available to everyone who registered for the class for a 2-week period following the class. Now, there will be a day or so delay. We have to do some post-production work on the recording of the class. But within a day or so, we'll be able to access the recording of that class. Now, that recording will be limited to people who actually registered for the course in the first place. But if you'd like to be able to access that course content, but can't do it on Saturday, January 8th, or just would like a couple weeks extra opportunity to go over the recording as well, that will be made available to everyone who registers for this class. And you can register for the class again at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. That's law of self-defense. Type it in the comments here. Hopefully that'll work. Advanced, and that's pretty much all day Saturday, January 8th. It's a live class. It's taught live by me, much like you're watching this. Assuming you're watching this live, except we do it by Zoom. So shortly, everyone who's registered will be sent the necessary credentials they need to access the class for the day of Saturday, January 8th, using Zoom on their computer. And anyway, that's just wanted to make you aware of all of that. You will have access not just to the live class itself on Saturday, January 8th, but also the recording afterwards. Okay. Now, let me scroll through and see if we got any super chats that I need to address. Boom, boom, boom. Okay. Oh, good. Not so many. So we should be able to wrap up. Oh, somebody, Yoba Restreams typed in Yoba, gave a super chat comment. Yeah, so on the video itself, there was, I believe it's yoba.com, apparently is the source of the video. So if you'd like to see the full version that they provide, including the comments and the full length of the video, then I would encourage you to go there. It's certainly not our, it's not law self-defense video. It's just, we just used a snippet of what was forwarded to us over the internet. No, it's not clear to me that another super chat saying the pepper spray was 100% justified. This was attempted murder. I don't see attempted murder here. 2 punches to the face separated with the other person is also threatening some degree of force. Doesn't look like attempted murder to me. A sustained beatdown, if he had mounted the man on the bottom as Trayvon Martin did to George Zimmerman, and it was a sustained beating into the cement of the sidewalk, that's different. But that's not what happened here. Crit's Cake asks, do fists count as deadly if a man attacks a woman? Well, fists count as deadly if the nature of the attack is such that the fists are reasonably likely to inflict death or serious bodily injury. So a barehanded attack can be a deadly force attack. If someone's choking you to death with their hands and they're strong enough that you're substantively likely to suffer death or serious bodily injury, that's a deadly force attack. If they're mounted on you and they're beating your head into a sidewalk in a sustained way while you're screaming desperately for help and nobody is coming, that's an attack likely to inflict death or serious bodily injury, maiming. So those would be deadly force attacks with the use of bare hands. But 99.999% of the time, when one person punches another, there is no death or serious bodily injury. There's a bloody nose, there's a black eye. And so the courts invariably treat a simple barehanded attack as a non-deadly force attack, not as a deadly force attack. There has to be some aggravating factor, either a sustained attack, a disparity of numbers, somebody who's really dramatically stronger, larger, than the other party. So if Mike Tyson punches me in the face, that I would say would be a deadly force attack because of his strength and skill as a combatant. But normally a bar punch, not going to be deemed as a deadly force attack, especially if it's once or twice and not sustained in any way. Let's see. Another one, Crusade Arasan, super chat. Thank you very much. He says, you'd get along very well with Drexel. He said the same thing about intervening to save women getting beat on the streets. Well, it's really just common sense, folks. I'm sure Drexel is a nice guy and Nick likes him. So that's a good testament. The reason I was not on Nick's show last night, I believe I was invited by Nick, kindly enough, is nothing to do with Drexel or, I mean, even really the subject matter. It's just I need to sleep at night. I don't know how Nick does it, but those 10, 11 o'clock shows that run for hours at a time, can't do it on a regular basis. Let's see. Groves Russell asks, is there a defense of others when it's a police officer in uniform who is the aggressor, such as Chauvin? Could someone have got the officer off him? The answer is, remember, defense of others is a legal defense. It's not some kind of absolution. It doesn't mean you won't face criminal charges. It means when you face criminal charges for your use of force, that would be the legal defense that you raise. So if someone had intervened and, say, shoved Chauvin off of George Floyd, almost certainly they would have been charged with assault on a police officer, and their legal defense would have been defense of others. Now, keep in mind, of course, if they'd done that and George Floyd had lived, it would not have appeared to most people that George Floyd was being subject to a deadly force attack by Chauvin, which would undermine the justification for using force against Chauvin to stop him from what he was doing. We only know, or at least some people believe, that Chauvin's conduct was deadly towards Floyd because Floyd died. If Floyd had not died because, I mean, if you believe that it was Chauvin's knee that killed Floyd, if Chauvin had been shoved off of Floyd, then presumably Floyd would not have died. So the justification for shoving Chauvin off of Floyd, that you were saving Floyd's life, would not be so apparent. But that is the legal defense that you would raise in that context, defense of others, that you used force against the police officer, but your use of force was legally justified because it was a necessary defense of others. Whether you can get anyone to buy that legal defense is a separate question entirely. Let's see what else. And thank you, all of you, for spending time here on such short notice. Again, I had not planned to do another live stream today, but the story came up and it seemed an appropriate time, if nothing else, for more technology testing, really boomer testing of the technology, to see to what extent we can get things to work. And obviously we got the screen sharing to work this time, more or less. So that is encouraging. In fact, I'll take that down now so I'm a little bigger. Let's see. And I guess that's it. That's the bottom of the comments. All right, folks. So I'm going to wrap up. Just to remind you, Saturday, January 8th, our law self-defense class covers all this and much, 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 much more over the course of a full day instruction. Saturday, January 8th, 2022. We only teach it once every year or two. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, if you want to participate, but you can't attend on January 8th, we will make a recording of that live class available to all the registered people for at least a 2-week period after the class, so you can catch up. All right, folks. And that class, you can learn more about it at lawofselfdefense.com/advanced. And with that, I will say, remember, if you carry a gun so you're hard to kill, that's why I carry a gun, so I'm hard to kill, my family is hard to kill, then you also owe it to yourself to make sure you know the law so you're hard to convict. All right, folks, I hope to see a bunch of you on Saturday, but regardless, until the next time we meet up again, have a happy and safe New Year. Please be safe. Please don't drive drunk. Be safe in every respect. And I remain Attorney Andrew Branca for Law of Self-Defense. Take care.